and the 16th of December 1944. The Belgian Ardennes -15. American driver, mechanic James Barker, sits inside a knocked-out Sherman around him. The bodies of his 3 crewmates. The turret has been torn open by a German shell. The radio is silent. The engine is dead. At a distance of 200 meters, a column of Panzer IV rolling straight toward Allied positions. Barker climbs out of the tank. He circles it, peers into the hole in the armor, and suddenly starts laughing. Not from fear, not from hysteria, from clarity. He realizes the engine is not damaged. The fuel tank is intact. The tracks can be reset by hand. 40 minutes later, the Sherman comes alive again. One man with no crew, no comms, no support, starts a tank in the middle of a battlefield and turns it against the enemy. This is not a legend. It is a documented episode of Operation Wacht, a story about how madness becomes the only form of reason when war turns everything to chaos. The Ardennes Offensive, the Wehrmacht's last desperate attempt to reverse the course of the war. On the Western Front, Hitler throws in everything. 250,000 soldiers, hundreds of tanks and assault guns, thousands of artillery pieces. The goal, break through American lines, seize the port of Antwerp, and split the Allied forces. The attack begins on the 16th of December in a thick fog that hides the German columns from Allied aircraft. James Barker, a 22-year-old driver-mechanic from the state of Ohio, serves with the 7th Armored Division. His Sherman M4A3 carries serial number 3089745 and is armed with a 75mm M3 gun and 2 Browning M1 1919 machine guns. Crew 5, Commander. Lieutenant Robert Kane, gunner. Sergeant William Hayes, loader. Private Andrew Mills, bow gunner. Private Thomas Ridley, driver. James Barker. That morning, the company receives orders to hold the road near the village of Malmedy. Reconnaissance reports enemy activity minimal, but reconnaissance is wrong. At 6:20, 3 German tanks emerge from the woods, then 5, and a few minutes later, an entire battalion. Barker's tank is hit within the second minute of the fight. The sound of a German 75mm KWK-40 firing is unlike a normal explosion. It's a dull metallic blow that stretches through space as if someone ripped a vast iron curtain. Barker hears that sound a heartbeat before the shell strikes the turret. An internal explosion is not like in the movies. It isn't a bright fireball, but a pressure wave that tears living things apart. Tissue, lungs, eardrums. Shards of metal sight through at 800 meters per second. At the center, temperatures climb to 2,000 degrees. Barker sits up front in the driver's compartment, the only part of the tank separated by an armored bulkhead. That is what saves him. He hears the commander scream, sees smoke forcing its way through the slit of the hatch. Instinct yells, "Run!" But he doesn't move. Barker slams the emergency engine kill lever, grabs the fire extinguisher, and blasts foam into the engine bay. The 4 GAA could flare from a single spark. He knows it. The tank falls silent around him. Explosions, shots, screams on the intercom. Silence. The commander doesn't answer. The gunner doesn't either. Barker cracks the driver's hatch and climbs out. The turret is ripped open. Inside, 3 dead. Kane, Hayes, Mills, bodies burned, motionless. Ridley lies beside the tank, alive but unconscious, badly wounded in the abdomen. Around them, 5 burned-out Shermans. German tanks push forward. Barker stands by his tank and watches them. He doesn't run. He doesn't shout. He stands. Why didn't he run? Later in a field hospital during. Questioning, Barker will put it simply. I thought the tank might still drive and that I had a chance. A chance for what? Rescue? Attack? Death? Probably all of it at once. Barker walks around the Sherman, checking the damage carefully. The turret destroyed, the gun blown apart, the radio dead, but the tracks intact, the fuel tank not punctured, and most important, the engine hadn't caught fire. He crawls back inside, squeezing past the bodies of his crew, and reaches the start panel. He presses the starter. The engine coughs and dies again, the same. A third try. Silence. Then Barker does what no manual would allow. He climbs back out straight into the firestorm, opens the engine deck covers, and begins checking the ignition system. Contacts, wires, fuel lines, all of it under the whistle of bullets and the thunder of artillery. 10 minutes pass. He finds the cause. The starter wire was torn loose by the blast wave. Barker pulls off his belt, wraps it around the connector, and lashes the wire in place, by hand. Then he drops back into the tank. He hits the starter. The Sherman M4A3 weighed 32 tons. Length 6 meters, width 2 meters and 60 centimeters. Frontal armor 51 millimeters. Side armor 38. Top speed 42 kilometers per hour on road. Range 160 kilometers. Crew 5 men. But this time there was no crew. There was only one man. Barker sat down at the controls. In front of him 2 levers like bicycle brakes. Left, brakes, the left track. Turning the tank left. Right, the right, both at once. A stop. Throttle pedal to the right. Gear selector manual. 5 forward, 1. Reverse. He engaged first gear and pressed the throttle. The tank moved. The feeling was unreal. You sit inside a 30-ton steel box. Your dead crewmates around you. A shattered turret above your head and enemy tanks outside. And you drive anyway. Barker turned left, steered around a burned-out Sherman, and pulled onto the road. Ahead, roughly 300 meters away, stood Panzer IV, German medium tanks with 75mm guns capable of penetrating a Sherman at any distance. But they did not fire. Why? Because they did not understand what they were. Seeing a turretless Sherman rolling straight toward them looked absurd. The Germans thought it was a knocked-out tank that had accidentally started up, or a captured machine driven by their own troops. Barker drove straight at them, speed 25 kilometers per hour. The engine roared. His heart pounded so loud it felt like it would rip his chest apart. He had no plan. He only knew if he stayed, he would be killed. If he moved, maybe he would be killed later. At 200 meters, Barker finally saw the first German tank, clearly. Panzer IV AFH, a late variant with a long 75mm gun and armored skirts along the sides, gray camouflage with dark green striping. On the turret, the tactical number 231. The Panzer stood just off the road. Its commander was up in the hatch looking through binoculars, young, about 25, bareheaded, wearing headphones. Barker could see his face. The German glanced from the Sherman to the neighboring Panzer, not understanding what was happening. Barker kept coming. 150 meters, 100. Suddenly the German understood. He dropped into the turret and shouted something to his crew. The Panzer's turret began to turn slowly. Barker yanked the right lever. The Sherman jumped left, slid off the road, and plowed into the snow. The track spun, then bit, and the tank lunged forward. The German gun fired. The shell passed through the space where the Sherman had been a second before and smashed into a tree 50 meters behind. The blast sent shards and branches flying. Barker buried the throttle. Speed 30 kilometers per hour. The tank tore across the field, weaving. Between trees, bouncing over ruts. Second gear. Third. The engine howled. Metal shuddered. Behind him. Another shot. A miss. Barker understood. He could not fight. No gun, no radio, no crew. He could only run. But fleeing in a 30-ton tank through snow is like sprinting in iron boots through a bog. Every meter is a struggle. Ahead. The forest darkened. Thick black. Impassable for heavy vehicles. If he could reach it, he might live. 75 meters 50 a third shot. The shell exploded 10 meters to the right, kicked the tank upward. Barker slammed his head against the periscope. Blood ran down his face. He did not stop. The Sherman plunged into the trees. The spaces between the firs were tight. Branches scraped the armor, snapped, and showered the hull. Barker drove nearly blind. Through the periscope he saw only trunks, snow, and darkness. Speed 10 kilometers per hour. First gear, slow, careful. After 200 meters he stopped and killed the engine. Silence, not complete. Somewhere behind the forest. Explosions, engines shouting. The Germans kept advancing, but they were not pushing into these thickets. A Panzer would bog down here, within the first 50 meters. Barker sat in the tank and listened. Breathing, heartbeat, drops of blood tapping onto the floor. He wiped his face with his sleeve. A cut brow, nothing serious. His head was working, his hands too. What next? On the panel, a compass north, the way he had come. South, deeper into the forest toward Belgian villages, west, where the Americans ought to be, maybe. Barker started the engine again. He turned. West. He drove for 3 hours, slowly, carefully, threading between trees. Fuel was vanishing before his eyes. The Ford GAAA gulped roughly 300 liters per 100 kilometers off-road. About 150 liters remained in the tank, enough for roughly 50 kilometers, no more. 11 in the morning, he came out of the forest. Before him, an open snow-covered field, white and empty. In the distance, a village. Smoke rose above the roofs. Barker halted at the forest's edge. The village looked dead. No movement, no sound. Only smoke and cold. He knew it. Could be a trap. The Germans might have taken the village, or Belgians frightened of everything. Or even Americans ready to fire at anything that moved. But the fuel was dwindling and the cold was killing. Inside the tank, -10. No heater, no food, no water. If he stayed here, he would freeze before evening. Barker decided to drive toward the village. The name Roche for 47 houses, 180 residents, a Catholic church, a school, a mill. Before the war, they grew wheat and kept livestock. On December 16, 1944, the village was empty. The Sherman clattered slowly over the cobbles of the main street, windows shattered or boarded, doors standing wide open, not a soul. Barker halted by the church, shut down the engine, and climbed out. The silence was worse than explosions. Wind drove snow down the street. Crows sat on the rooftops, staring straight at him. Barker approached the nearest house. The door was unlocked. Inside, a table, a few chairs, a hearth. On the table, uneaten food, a piece of bread, cheese, a pitcher of milk, all of it cold. People had fled in haste. He took the bread and ate it where he stood. Then he drank the milk near icy, but it did not matter. For the first time in 12 hours, he had food. In the corner, a stove. Barker lit a fire. There was plenty of wood, a little warmth, a little quiet, 20 minutes of rest and thoughts. Where were the Americans? Where was the front line? He did not know. The radio was dead, no map. He had simply been moving west and hoping. And then a sound. An engine, distant but familiar. Barker sprang up and ran outside. The sound was getting closer. He rushed to the tank, started the engine, and tucked the Sherman behind the church. A minute later, a German BMW R75 motorcycle with sidecar rolled onto the street. 2 soldiers, driver and machine gunner. They rode slowly, peering into the houses. Barker watched through a narrow gap between walls. His heart thudded in his throat. His hands gripped the levers. The German stopped at the very house he had just left. The driver climbed down and went inside. A minute later, he came out and shouted something to his comrade. Both laughed. Then they mounted up again and rode off to the east. Barker waited another 10 minutes. Silence. Then he edged the tank out from behind the church and drove the other way to the west. The road ran through forest. Narrow, twisting, drifted with snow. Barker held second gear, speed about 20 kilometers per hour. Visibility no more than 100 meters. Beyond that, only trunks and mist. Around 14:30 he saw them. Bodies along the verges, in the ditches, simply in the drifts. American soldiers, dozens, perhaps hundreds, all dead. Barker braked, stopped the tank, climbed out, and walked to the nearest. The boy lay on his back, arms flung wide. A young face about 20. His helmet had rolled away. He wore the infantry uniform of the 106th Division. On his chest, several close-range bullet wounds. Farther on, 3 more, then 5 more. The same picture, point-blank shots, some in the back of the head. This had not been a battle. It had been an execution. Later, this stretch would be named the Malmedy Massacre. On December 17, 1944, near a crossroads, elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division, Liebstand Tarta, intercepted an American artillery convoy. 84 prisoners were marched into a field and machine-gunned. Those who tried to flee were finished with cutty-grass shots. 43 soldiers survived by playing dead. Their testimonies would become core evidence at Nuremberg. Barker did not know that now. He only looked at the bodies and grasped the essential point. The Germans were taking no prisoners. He returned to the tank, pressed the throttle, drove faster. Chapter 8. Encounter with the Tiger. Around 1600, the fuel was almost gone. The needle trembled near the red, enough for 10, maybe 15 kilometers. Barker kept heading west, hoping for American positions. A checkpoint, a patrol, any sign of his own. Instead, he saw a Tiger one, a heavy German tank, weight 57 tons, frontal armor 100 millimeters, main armament, an 88 millimeter K. 36, that could pierce any Allied tank from 2 kilometers. Crew 5, maximum speed 38 kilometers per hour. Total produced 1,347 for the Allies, the most feared of. Beasts. It stood at a crossroads, motionless, the turret angled away, the engine silent. Barker stopped roughly 300 meters out. He watched. He waited. The Tiger did not move. Knocked out. Broken down. Empty. Barker eased forward. 250. 200. Suddenly the Tiger's turret swung to face him. Barker ripped at the levers. The Sherman leapt left and slid off the road. A thunderclap of a shot. The shell slid through the air where the tank had been a moment earlier and split a tree. Fragments peppered the snow. Barker threaded the hole between trunks. The track slipped, bit, and hauled forward. Second, third. The Tiger tracked him slowly, bringing the gun to bear. A second shot wide. The burst only 20 meters off. Barker zigzagged, masking himself with trees. A Sherman had no chance frontally. Even a sound 75 could not punch a Tiger's nose at 500 meters, and Barker had no gun at all. A third shot, impact into the left track. The tank lurched. A link spun off. The Sherman slewed in place, slammed into a trunk, and stalled. Barker cracked his head on the instrument panel. Dark mows swimming, the taste of blood. He shook himself, turned the key. The engine caught, but the hole would not move. The left track was destroyed. Through the periscope, he watched the Tiger slowly traverse toward him. 150 meters. 100. Barker sat in a dead steel box and waited for the shot. A shot thundered from the flank, not from the Tiger, from the forest. A flash. An explosion against the heavy Germancy. The armor held, but the Tiger halted. Another flash, and another. Out of the darkness came 3 American tanks, Sherman M4A3, an older cast-hole variant with a 75mm gun. They caught the Tiger in a crossfire. The Germans swung the turret and fired. The first Sherman went up in the flames. The crew bailed out and sprinted for the trees. The second put a round into the Tiger's side. It punched through the skirt, but stuck in the main armor. The Tiger answered and knocked out the second Sherman. The third circled behind and struck the rear. The thinnest plates, penetration, smoke. The Tiger tried to turn, but the engine coughed out. A hatch clanged open. The Tiger's crew leapt out and ran for the woods. The Americans did not finish them. This fight was already over for them. The third Sherman rolled up to Barker's tank. A hatch opened. The commander, a captain of about 35 with a cigar clenched in his teeth, shouted, "You alive, soldier?" Barker's throat was dry. He only nodded. "Climb out. We're taking you." He crawled out. His legs shook. He stood in the snow, staring at his Sherman. No turret, no gun, a torn track. He had driven at 40 kilometers alone, straight through German lines. The captain dropped down, looked at the tank, then at Barker. "How'd you do it?" Barker shrugged. "I don't know." Barker was taken to a field hospital in the Belgian town of Spa. Diagnosis, concussion, a split eyebrow, frostbitten fingers on the right hand, exhaustion. The doctors pressed to evacuate him to England. He refused. On December the 17th, intelligence officers questioned him, what he had seen, how many German tanks, directions of movement, any new equipment spotted. Barker told them everything about the Panzer IV near Malmedy, the empty road, the bodies on the forest road, the Tiger at the crossroads. The officers took notes. One asked, "Why didn't you abandon the tank? Why keep driving?" Barker thought and answered, "Because the tank still worked and I didn't want the Germans to take it." The officer nodded, made a note, and added, "You know, our guys already found your tank." The 3rd Battalion, 7th Company, took them 3 days to tow it. The mechanics say it can be restored. Barker was surprised. "Really? Really? You want to go back to the line?" "Yes, sir." On December 21, 1944, Sergeant James Barker returned to the 7th Armored Division. They issued him a new Sherman M4A3E8, an Easy 8, with improved suspension and a 76mm gun, serial number 3102847. A new crew: Commander Lieutenant David Stone, Gunner, Sergeant Michael O'Brien, Loader, Corporal Richard Lombard, Bow Gunner, Private Joseph Kramer. Barker settled behind the levers, started the engine, and drove back to the front. Chapter 11. The End of the Operation. The Battle of the Ardennes lasted until January 25, 1945. The Germans pushed about 80 kilometers deep, forming a bulge, hence the English name Battle of the Bulge, but they failed to break the front. On December 23rd, the weather cleared. Allied aircraft took to the sky. P-47. Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs hit the columns, burned tanks and shredded trucks. Without fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements, the offensive choked. General Patton's Third Army tore open the ring around Bastonia. General Haig's First Army counterattack attacked from the north. The Wehrmacht fell back. By January 25th, the front line had returned roughly to its pre-offensive positions. Wehrmacht had losses, about 100,000 men, 800 tanks, and thousands of guns. The Allies approximately 90,000, but they could replenish. Germany no longer could. Barker fought to the end. His tank liberated Belgian towns, crossed the Rhine, and battled on into Germany. On May 8th, 45 capitulation. The war was over. He returned home in June 45 to Ohio to his parents and the girl who had waited 3 years. The wedding in July, 3 children. Barker worked as a mechanic, repaired cars, lived an ordinary life. He did not talk about the war. When his children asked, he waved it off. His wife did not press. He simply lived, worked, grew old. In 1984, exactly 40 years after the Ardennes, a local newspaper journalist stumbled on his story. Some veteran recalled a mechanic who had driven a crippled tank alone through German lines. The journalist found Barker and asked for an interview. He refused. It was a long time ago, and it wasn't heroism. It was just survival. The article ran anyway, drawn from archives in December '84. Barker read it and kept silent. He died in 1998 at the age of 76, quietly in his sleep at home. His children, grandchildren, and friends came to the funeral. They did not speak of the war. On the headstone, James Barker, driver. Mechanic, 7th Armored Division, 1922-1998, and below a single line. He did not give up. Sherman M4A3, serial number 3089745. The very tank Barker drove on the 16th of December, 1944, did not die. After recovery from the forest, the Americans sent the vehicle to a repair base in Liege. The mechanics assessed the damage. The turret destroyed, the radio dead, the left track torn. By contrast, the hull intact, the engine able to start the transmission functional. They rebuilt the tank, fitted a new turret anew. Gun, a new radio, and replaced the track. In February of '45, it returned to the front. The crew was different. The commander, Lieutenant John Harrison, they did not know the machine's story. For them, it was just another Sherman. The tank fought until the end of the war. It survived 2 battles and 1 more hit, this time into the turret with no crew losses. On the 8th of May '45, it stood by the Rhine when capitulation was announced. After the war, Sherman 308-9745 was struck from the rolls and sent to a depot in France. There it sat for 30 years, rusting, aging, fading from memory. In 1978, a French collector, Jean-Pierre Dubois, found it. He bought it, restored it, and put it on display in a private museum in Normandy. The placard said, laconically, Sherman M4A3 took part in the Battle of the Ardennes, 1944, not a word about Barker. In 2010, the museum closed. An American collector purchased the tank and transferred it to the Armor Museum at Fort Benning, Georgia. Now it stands there in the World War II gallery nearby. Other Shermans, Panzers, Tigers. Tourists take pictures. Children touch the cold armor. The placard reads Sherman M4A3, 7th Armored Division, Ardennes, 1944. And below in small print, this tank covered 40 kilometers through enemy lines with a single crewman aboard, driver-mechanic Sergeant James Barker. Now they know James Barker was not the only one. The history of the Second World War is full of moments when one tank and one person altered the course of a fight. August 44, Normandy. German tanker, captain. Michael Whitman in a Tiger destroyed 14 British tanks in 15 minutes, 1 crew against an entire column. A week later, he was killed. Canadian Shermans boxed in his vehicle and shot it from multiple directions. July 43, the Kursk salient. Soviet Lieutenant Pavlo Hudz, commander of a T-34, knocked out 6 German tanks in a single engagement. His machine burned, but he did not withdraw. He was killed by a direct hit. December 41, North Africa. British Sergeant Charles Hazlitt, in a light crusader, delayed the advance of a German panzer division for 3 hours, 1 tank against 30. He was wounded but fought to his last round. This is not heroism in the usual sense. It is something else. It is the moment a person understands. Escape is impossible. Rescue is improbable. Death is almost certain and still chooses to fight. Not for glory, not for medals, but because there is no other way to be. Barker did not call himself a hero. He said so himself. He was a mechanic. He knew how an engine works, how to change a track, how to start a tank with no electrics. And when the time came, he did what he knew best. He started the tank. He drove. Everything else was just chance. The Ardennes ended in January 1945. The war in May. The tanks went to depots, to scrap, to museums. The soldiers went home and mechanics became mechanics again. James Barker lived another 53 years after the war. He worked, raised children, and almost never mentioned December of '44. For him, it was not a story. It was just a day. A long, cold, terrifying day that he survived. And for us, it is a reminder. War is not only generals and maps, not only strategies and orders. War is people. Ordinary, exhausted, frightened people who in a critical instant make a choice to run or to stay, to give up or to fight, to die or to live. Barker made his choice. He was not thinking of glory. He was thinking of a tank that could still move and of himself who could still hold the levers. This is not madness. It is something more. It is will. Today, 80 years after the Ardennes, the world is different. The tanks are different. The wars are different, but people the same. We still stand before the same choice. To flee or to remain, to surrender or to resist. And each of us in our own moment becomes that mechanic in a crippled tank. Chaos all around, the unknown ahead, death behind. And then the essential question, what do you do? Barker answered simply. He started the engine. The story of Sherman 308-9745 is not about heroism. It is about how a machine becomes an extension of a person, how 32 tons of steel, aluminum, and fuel turn into will, a refusal to quit. The tank had no gun, no crew, no radio, no support, no chance. But it had one thing, a man who believed the engine still ran, and that proved enough. We like to recall the great battles, Stalingrad, Normandy, Kursk, thousands of tanks, millions of soldiers, the fates of nations. But history is not made by armies. It is made by individuals. One mechanic, one tank, one decision. Multiply that by thousands of moments and you get a war. Multiply by millions and you get victory. Barker did not win the war. He simply survived one day. But that day became a link in a vast chain. Day by day, tank by tank, soldier by soldier. That led to the 8th of May, '45, to capitulation, to silence, to home. There is one detail Barker never shared publicly, but he told it to his grandson in 1995, 3 years before he died. The grandson wrote it in a diary and after his grandfather's death, gave it to a military archive. As Barker drove through the forest alone in a crippled tank, he began to sing, not a song, not a hymn, just a melody his mother used to hum to him before asleep, about a bird flying home, about a road that leads into the light. He sang softly to himself amid the roar of the engine and the screech of the tracks, because otherwise the silence would have driven him mad. And that melody carried him through the forest, through the ghost village, along the road of death. Home Sherman, 3089745, now stands in a museum, restored, painted, motionless. Tourists look, read, the placard, take photos. To them it is only an exhibit. But if you know the story, you see more. The hole in the turret painted over, but visible. The welded seam on the track where the tiger tore it. The scratches on the armor from the fir branches he pushed through in the woods. You see a machine that survived and the man who made it live. The war ended. The tanks fell silent. Barker returned to his ordinary life. Repaired cars, raised children, grew old. He never considered himself a hero. He said, "I was just doing my job." And there is the essence. Heroism is not always a feat before thousands of eyes. Sometimes it is simply a job done to the end. Despite cold, fear, and pain, Barker was a mechanic. His task, keep the tank moving. And he did it even without a crew, without chances, without any reason except one, not to surrender. He did not quit. He started the engine. And he drove. Now in 2025, the world again speaks of tanks, wars, and the choice between flight and fight. Barker's story is not a command, not a sermon, and not a romanticizing of violence. It is a reminder that in a critical moment, each of us is that mechanic in a crippled tank. Chaos around, the unknown ahead, and there is only a choice to yield or to try. Barker tried and the tank moved. After the war, he taught his son to repair engines. The son taught the grandson. The grandson became a military engineer, served in Iraq, fixed Humvees under fire, and came back alive. When asked, "How did you not break under mortar fire?" he answered, "My granddad said, if the engine is running, you are alive. And if you are alive, the rest can be fixed." That is the legacy. Not medals, not articles, not a museum placard, but a simple rule. As long as the engine runs, keep going. James Barker, driver-mechanic, 7th Armored Division, 1922-1998. He did not give up. And the Sherman M4A3, serial number 3089745, still stands in a museum, motionless but alive. A memory of that December day when one man, one tank, and one idea, the engine still runs, proved stronger then.